Welcome to Evolving on Purpose with Matt Swartz. This podcast is where real leaders share the inner work behind their breakthroughs and where you'll find the tools and stories to work through whatever is holding you back from who you're meant to be so you can make the impact you're here to make and help change the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Evolving on Purpose. This week, we're talking about organic growth. So I want to take you back. Little Matt, maybe about 13, 14 years old. I am cutting the lawn with the lawnmower, and I have my headphones in and my Walkman CDs with my borrowed Northville District Library personal growth compact discs from Wayne Dyer and Alan Watts and Tony Robbins and all of these people, right? And part of what this content said was that you could have the certain content, right, said you could have whatever you wanted right now if you just believed hard enough. And what that was confusing to me, right? Like the Tony Robbins stuff is like, okay, form a plan and take some steps. And like that made sense to me. But there was this other more like spiritual personal growth content that said you can have whatever you want. And you know, you just have to change your beliefs and you just have to believe it hard enough, right? And so for me, that created like really a lot of shame and confusion because I believed that I was special and unique and I could do something, and I believed really hard. But the things didn't just show up. Like Alan Watts would say, you could achieve enlightenment this second. You just need to be there, right? So I walked away from that, right? Believing that I was defective, something was wrong with me, and then I had to, okay, I can do the Tony Robbins way. I can do the, Northville, work hard, study, get good grades. So that's what I have to do because I can't do this like just believe stuff, right? But it created shame for me. So what that meant was as I got older, and I'm flash forward maybe into my 20s, right? I'm still super into personal growth. I'm starting my therapy career, and my life, like, emotionally inside, I would swing between these seasons. I would have these seasons of extreme, just like accept and let what is, again, Tony Robbins, not Tony Robbins, Wayne Dyer, Alan Watts, Eckhart Tolle, Thich Nhat Hanh, right? Just accept and let go and surrender and don't want. And then I would feel stuck. And so I would swing back the other side to forcing Tony Robbins, massive action, take the hill. And it would go back and forth for years, right? And what I've discovered now as an adult being able to like put all of this together is that each was a half of the truth. And getting too far into one side of the pendulum or another, that's where things break down. Right? And I say this all the time in my work, it's the extremes you want to watch out for. So what I'm trying to bring people into is the synthesis, okay? I didn't ultimately find my answer in a book or a seminar. I actually watched it at the end of the day, observing nature, right? So I watched, I love being in the forest. I love hiking, right? I watched how living things grew. And what I realized over time was that growth was neither pure surrender nor pure force, right? A garden doesn't just accept what's happening, right? But it doesn't grind either. It gets cultivated. So I'm going to snap you back to another childhood memory. I'm about 8 or 9 years old. I'm in the driveway. Nature had been trying to teach me these things before my adulthood, before I can see it. I was maybe 8 or 9 or 10 years old. I was on my blacktop driveway, like asphalt driveway, right? And I was pouring water down the driveway. And I was watching it branch off, branch again and branch again and branch again. And, it looked like a tree drawing itself, right? All of these branches going in different directions, right? And there was something in me at the time, and I couldn't fully put it together, but there was something that said, okay, this is how life works. It was a big thought for like an 8, 9, 10-year-old, right? It wasn't a straight line. And there were things interrupting it. Things didn't go on command, but they worked their way out. They swam their way around, right? It finds its way. It branches. It grows. And I didn't have the words for it then. I was 9 years old. But this episode, I'm trying to put words to this thing that took me probably 30 years to find the right words for. And for those of you who are a little more spiritual, I do see this as a very sort of spiritual concept that, we don't necessarily have one destiny. We have all of these different branching opportunities that we could take. Like, I'm not going to be a pro basketball player, but I can go this direction or that direction. Tomorrow I could wake up, spend more time on my speaking, more time on my podcast, more time on my clients, all of these different branches that go different directions, right? But this is how life proceeds. And what I believe in teaching people flow is I want to find those easiest pathways, those most conducive pathways that allow you and the people around you to benefit the most. So here's what I'm going to say. You can't manifest corn. Right? Nobody's ever manifested corn. You put a seed in the ground and it grows, and it takes months, and there's no amount of believing that's going to speed up the cornfield. Okay, so flashback to the episode you just watched, right? We're talking about Dave, right? We're having that conversation. He's a talented coach. He's building something real. He's come from a real place. He's trying to help people like him, ADHD, shame, men, trying to, build a better life, right? He's talking about this. And I'm seeing that same sort of dilemma. Like, I did it. I burned the ships. I went out. I started this coaching company, and it's not moving the speed I want it to move, right? And so I can see this machine, and I'm going to talk more about this, trying to run him, while on the other side, he has an understanding of this organic growth, right? So the problem is then when it's not full, when it hasn't met our expectation, we're treating it as evidence about our worth, right? And that's where things get really deep. So not picking on Dave, the story at this point. I told him in the session, coaches and founders, like, we get this. We're there, right? I was Dave. I understand. Like, this isn't going fast enough, right? So for anybody who's building a business, building a team, building themselves, and you're ashamed of your own pace, I'm going to explain how this actually works so you can feel less shame, but more importantly, you can grow and build the way you were meant to. So let's talk about the machine, right? We have this idea, this machine idea in our head. And this machine idea is, I should be able to build this business, build this team, and there should be a clear set of inputs and outputs, and I should be able to get where I go, and I just have to push the knobs and the levers and the buttons, and then it should work every time, right? Well, it doesn't. Where did this idea come from? Okay, we are about 150 years downstream of the Industrial Revolution. It's 150 years of the same factory logic: inputs, outputs, quotas, standardized parts, replaceable parts, speed up the line, right? And anybody who's been through the standard, the public school, even private school setting, right? School runs on the same blueprint. There's a bell schedule. Everybody's batched by age. There's all these standardized tests. The product that the school is designed to ship is a replaceable part that fits a machine. A corporation tends to try to act like a machine that runs on replaceable parts, and these parts are people. Okay? So Dave told a story about growing up in school, his report card, right? This was in his interview, right? He's getting these grades he didn't like, maybe some D's, maybe some F's, right? But the teacher's notes were, great kid, really smart, compassionate, right? The grades were measuring the part, but the notes saw the seed, right? Saw his capacity and who he was truly trying to become, right? So most of us spend 10, 20 years unconsciously trying to become a part. Even if it's a CEO part, it's still, this sort of mechanistic understanding, right? But we end up feeling miserable because everything in you that's alive isn't going to be a part, right? Who you were meant to be is so much bigger than that, right? So when you finally leave, and for some people that happens because they hit a wall or they explode or they decide to leave. So you try to leave and start your own thing. In your head, the invisible model is this machine. And so you're creating your business plan, doing your strategic plan. You're doing it like a machine. You've escaped the factory, but now you're building a smaller factory and you move yourself into it. And then you wonder why you're so miserable, right? And so again, this, if you're a business builder, if you're a team builder as a leader, right? I want to be clear. I'm not anti-systems. I like my standard operating procedures. I like my funnels. I like my structure. Dave and I talked about that. These things matter, right? A garden has trellises, but the trellises serve the vine. The vine doesn't serve the trellis, right? So there needs to be a skeleton, there needs to be a structure, but we shouldn't be serving that structure. The structure might need to change to support us. So, how do you know that machine-based thinking is running you? It is. The tell is shame. Machine logic says, given the inputs, the outputs are guaranteed on schedule. So the incorrect output means it's a defective part. I should have been further along by now, right? That's quota language. Dave said in the session, I thought within 6 months or so, I'm going to be super successful, 5 clients a month, my roster's full, and then it wasn't. And watch the leap he takes. He goes straight to, you're not worthy of doing this. You don't have the paper. I can't tell you how many coaches I talk to. That are like, oh, well, you're a therapist. You have the paper, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just don't want people to limit themselves based on that structure. I know great coaches and bad coaches. I know great therapists and bad therapists. And do I think that getting a degree and building knowledge is helpful? Yes, but I don't think that it should preclude, not having it should preclude you from being able to do the thing you were brought here to do. A timeline miss becoming a worth verdict. That is the machine gauge misreading a living thing. You are a living thing. Your business, your team, it is an organic, living thing. Okay? You cannot compare your 3-month garden to somebody's 10-year harvest, right? That's what you're seeing on Instagram. You're seeing they've done all this work, they've built all of these things, and you're comparing yourself, right? So this isn't a weakness, this machine-based thinking. It's just schooling. It's a program you installed. You were graded like a part for 16 years. You weren't allowed to listen because if at 8 years old, at 10 years old, if you'd just been able to listen to what you wanted to do, what would you have been doing? Running around, right? So they treat you, sit down, shut up, right? And again, this is not a knock on teachers. This is a knock on a system. I love teachers. I've had so many wonderful teachers. I am so grateful. I benefited from the system. I achieved through the system. But at the end of the day, too much of that system taught me to think of myself as a machine instead of allowing myself to be the flawed, beautiful, organic thing that I am, okay? Nobody stands in their garden in April screaming at the dirt because there's no corn or tomatoes or lettuce or whatever you're making, right? And shame doesn't work as a fertilizer. A plant's not going to grow because you're disappointed in it. Neither does a business, neither do you. Talked in a past episode, right? A machine that's built to run on fear or shame isn't going to produce peace or worth, right? Shame is tied to worth, and what I want people to feel worthy is they're building the business, which is essentially to say, even if I haven't got my results yet, I deserve to be doing what I'm doing because I know I can help people and I know I can do something to make the world a better place, okay? So, when the machine model fails, people tend to run to 2 doors. Door 1, force it. More hours, more grind, tighten the quota, machine mode, push hard, fix, right? The other option, door 2, is we're going to skip all that. I don't want to suffer anymore, so we're going to go to manifestation. Just believe hard enough, and the client will appear overnight. I'm not anti-manifestation, but listen, the machine paradigm can be so insidious. If you're not careful, manifestation is going to be machine thinking in spiritual clothes. It wants the harvest without the season, right? Manifestation is not a vending machine for wishes. It's not supposed to be insert belief, collect business, right? There's all of this organic, these pieces like trust and patience, and these things are important, whether it's to goal setting or manifestation or whatever you want to call it, right? I'm, again, not knocking belief or vision. Ideas have creative power, but there's a bridge that has to take place between the thing and the idea. And this is, as somebody who has big dreams and big ideas, that's also figured out how to build businesses and how to build teams, right? So think of, like a Lego house, right? You got to grab the bricks, you got to find the instructions, and you got to go step by step. You can't magically leapfrog it. Just staring at the Legos and making it magically there. The journey is the whole thing. Little spiritual comment would be, ask God for wisdom, and he's going to give you a situation that allows you to learn, not magic wisdom, right? It's the process. It's a journey. Okay. So talked about my teenage seasons. Robbins was door 1, right? Force, fight. The manifestation tips were door 2. I lived inside each door. I've done both. I've broken each one down. They break down, right? Because both are machine answers in different clothes, right? So one is the force machine, the other one wishes for the machine. Okay, so I'm going to give you a third door. Grow it. Learn how living things actually work. They're organic. They're emergent. I do this with my business consulting. I use these principles of emergent and organic organization. A business is not a machine you can assemble. The process evolves out of an organic process that developed by an expert learning it and implementing it and developing it, right? Business is not a machine you can assemble. It's a garden that you cultivate. And a team isn't an org chart. It's a multicellular organism. Okay, so let's say this is true. There are things, on one hand, that the gardener can do where you have agency as a business owner, as a leader, and there are things that you cannot. So let's start, right? Half of organic growth is in your hands. Half is, I would say, given to you. It's going on around you, right? Machine thinking confuses the two. It tries to control the givens and neglects the move. So I'm going to show you where you can do and where you can't do. Okay, we're going to start with the gardener, what you can actually do. Okay, the gardener yourself, energy. Okay, the first input into the garden is you. It's your fuel. It's how regulated you are. It's the state you come in with, right? A depleted gardener grows probably not that great of a garden, right? You can't pour out of an empty cup, right? An energized, engaged gardener is going to go build that beautiful garden. So don't be surprised, right, that if you are drained and you're trying to create something, it's not going to go where you want to go. It never does, right? So in business, right, your tank is empty. Every sales call, it feels like a need, right? It's like if we're at our end of our runway, the same conversation creates desperation instead of invitation. And prospects can feel the gardener state before they hear the offer, right? So it doesn't matter how good your language or your offer is. If you're in that state of desperation, it bleeds in, right? As a leader, your regulation is the room ceiling. A team, a family can only be as settled as you are internally regulated as the person leading it, which is why I teach leaders and business owners how to regulate themselves so they can regulate the system they're building, right? So let's take another piece, the water, right? The gardener comes in with some water. That's attention, right? You need to give your business, your team consistent care, and it can be small and boring and daily. This isn't about intensity. It's about consistency. You can't water a plant 40 times on a Saturday and then skip the rest of the month. You're going to drown it on Saturday and you're going to starve it through the week, right? This is about consistent little pieces, right? So you show up every Wednesday, right? You show up there. You do the small things you know you need to do. You do the social media posts. You make the outreach calls. You send the emails. You go to the networking meetings, even though it's not getting you something this very second. But you keep building it. You keep building it. You keep building it, right? I build a group. I keep coming every day. My lost a suicide group I used to do. The beginning was just one person, but then I kept coming every day, little by little. And that thing over the course of, maybe even a year and a half, by about a year and a half, that thing was almost 20, 30 people, right? Depending on the time. So, as a leader, what you water grows. So 10 minutes of real attention beats these grand gestures quarterly, right? So your team, your marriage, your kids, it's these little tiny moments. I found with my kids, like some of the most beautiful stuff is just that, like stuff that we do so consistently, right? The card games that I play with my son, the Legos I build, right? So we've got the gardener, we're watering. We also need to do some reading. You've got to remove the external constrictions, right? You got to pull what's competing for the plant's resources. This is growth by subtraction. You have to rate what's around this thing that you're trying to create, and you've got to pull and harvest the weeds so it has space for it to grow, right? So in business, maybe it's that old offer that you keep alive out of guilt, right? Like when I was still on my sliding fee scale and I felt bad charging people too much, right? Taking the wrong fit client that then ends up eating up 10 hours a month, right? The commitment that you took on 2 years ago and never redecided. I've had to, take a step back from commitments over the years, right? And not to mention the bad habits, the 2 hours a night doing crap when I could be writing something, or and again, I'm not talking about the forcing. I'm talking about I'm stimulated, I'm ready, and then I end up watching 2 hours of TV instead of letting my creative genius out on paper, right? So for leaders, right, I love doing the calendar audit. I mean, I tell them to bring their calendar in and I say, let's look at this. Is this a weed or is this a plant? And it's not black or white, right? I tell them to rate it on a scale of 0 to 10 for energy and impact. We're looking at both of those. And so most calendars are weeds filled with weeds that we didn't choose. So I start getting people to think about their calendar like a garden and what's a weed and what's the plant that we're trying to cultivate. So we want to remove those external constrictions. But we also need to prune the plant. So that's more the internal healing, right? So the weeds are around you, but there's also crap in you, right? So the gardener cuts off the living branches so that the plant can put energy where it matters, right? There are times where you have to cut some branches short and you have to carve it in certain directions, right? In business, there are times where we recognize we keep hitting the same wall, and that's where I guide the leaders back into that inner growth, right? There may be old habits that you're doing, old skills that you're using. I'm thinking about a business owner who, started delegating and then would take back the stuff to do because it wasn't getting done as well as he wanted. Yeah, but you have to train these people instead of just grabbing it back, right? And so that's that internal healing that needs to be done, right? For leaders, expired expectations that are still running the show, right? You're feeding these branches that stopped bearing fruit. And so we got to cut them off so that we can reassign that energy to the places in the plants that are actually going to collect the energy, right? And this is part of the work that I've done recently, trying to move my energy into these things that are going to put attention and energy out there instead of just my individual one-on-one sessions where nobody hears about what we're doing but that individual. So then next, right, what else can we do? We're planting the seeds, baby, right? You get to pick what seeds you plant, but here's the cool part, right? The seed already contains the whole plant, right? The acorn is already the oak, right? Worth isn't produced by a harvest, it's planted before it. And growth is nature's default, right? One seed is going to make 1,000. So you get to pick the seeds, but the seed is going to do the work, right? So, your offer at month 3 is a seed. It's not a failed harvest, right? You got to have the right offer in place, right? So that's a group that grows from 1 guy to 2 to nobody, back to 1 to 2, then back to 1, then back to 2, then back to 3, then back to 4, then back to 1, right? And it slowly grows, and it's going to keep growing as long as we keep doing the other things we talked about, putting the water in, all of that, right? So as a leader, your worth walking into the room isn't the quarter's numbers, right? It's your creative capacity. The skills that I have are enough. The things that I know how to do are enough to produce X, Y, Z results. And then if I want different results, I just need to build new skills. And that's we'll get there. That's new branches, right? The last thing you get to choose is the soil, the environment with which in that seed is cultivated, right? If you plant a seed in the desert, right, if it's an acorn in the desert, it's not going to grow, right? Nothing grows in bad soil, no matter how good the seed is. So you got to choose the right seed, but you got to choose the right soil. So choose and prepare that ground, right? Gardeners cultivate that ground. I'm going to have a new offer, right? Well, I have to build out all of this background infrastructure to support the new offer in my business, right? Or I'm going to hire somebody new. Well, I got to make sure that they have the right policies and the right training steps so that they can come in and they can grow with my business, right? So look, there are rooms and relationships as a leader that you decide to plant yourself in. And you may need to think about, is this the right soil for me? Are these the right rooms, right? Some feed you, stay there. Some might be leaching the soil, right? We'll come back to that at the end. But what's important is to evaluate the environment you're putting yourself in, and is it actually going to cultivate that seed that we've planted? Okay, so now here are the things that we don't have control over, right? The first section, that's all stuff you can do as an owner, and again, as a leader, as a high performer, right? But this is the parts of the garden you don't get to control. You can work with it, right? But this is where machine thinking breaks. You can't manufacture some of these things. So let's start with the sun, right? Purpose. The plant is orienting towards the light to gather that energy. You don't make the sun. But you can find the light and reach for it, right? So purpose is like, where are the needs out there, right? Where are the things that I have experience, talents, and gifts in that I can go out there and help with, right? That's who I am. That's my purpose. You don't make the sun. You don't decide what their problems are. You find your light and you reach for it. Purpose is, we call it phototropic, right? It's reaching for the light, right? It's not just a machine mission statement on the wall. So for a business, purpose is what keeps things growing when nobody's watching the numbers, right? A business reaching for real light to make a real difference, to do something really important, is going to outlast somebody chasing a number, chasing a goal, chasing a quarterly result. For a leader, right? You got to have your North Star. Dave's was, he wants to be a beacon for men who feel lost, right? When your work stops reaching towards the light, it doesn't die, but it becomes a job that you're miserable in. So, I'm not saying go out there and just do your passion. I'm saying you have to go out there and figure out, where that sun is, right? Where are the things that somebody needs that I have to provide? Next, the roots. Gratitude. Roots draw from what already exists instead of resenting the garden for not being a harvest yet, right? So we want to be thankful and grateful for the platform by which we're then going to move into these new things, right? 35 members, right, of a group or in a business isn't evidence of a failure. It's soil to draw from, right? Gratitude says, I want to build to 50. Great. You got to be grateful for the 35. Figure out what drew them there and what they talk about and what they care about so you can grow to 50, right? So the gratitude is what keeps you from ripping up the garden every time the algorithm shows you somebody else's, right? We got to work from what we already have. So Dave got here himself, right? He said, if past me looked at where I'm at, he would be really, really proud, right? That's the gratitude. You got to compare down your roots, not sideways to somebody else's branches next door, okay? So those roots are, I've worked really hard over time on finding this right middle ground between this purpose, this next step, but also the gratitude for where we're at, okay? So then if we were pulling in our sunlight, we've got our roots in the ground, we start to grow our branches, right? These are the avenues for growth, right? The tree tells you where it's growing, and it builds from the branches it's already producing. You can't just graft on foreign ones. Branches don't just randomly show up 3 feet away, right? Back to episode 12, right? You're trying to get a branch to grow on a different tree than its native. The tree's growing already. It already knows where the branches were going. We just have to follow it, right? So for Dave, right, one of his branches is facilitating groups. Like he knows this group work. He loves this. So the move isn't a new funnel or a new niche. It's work off of what's already there, right? Keep growing that branch, extend it, facilitate maybe for other coaches, run more circles. For any leader, right? This is the same with your people, your team, and your kids, right? The threads are already there. You want to grow who they are instead of grafting on who they're supposed to be. So, instead of the sort of like Huxley, my oldest, like instead of this sort of like heavy intensity baby Einstein thing, right? From day one, he loved to run. He was physical. And as much as I am not a physical person, I just want to like cultivate and build that thing that's already in him. And allow it to keep growing in the direction it's growing, right? Okay, next, the seasons. This is the hard one. Patience, right? Corn takes months. A baby takes 9. A practice, a business takes years. You can't negotiate with a season. Winter is part of the cycle, not a failure, right? The dead ground is doing invisible work. You just can't see it, right? So look, patience is so important when it comes to cultivating relationships, right? You want a business in 30 days. I mean, you still, sometimes may be possible, right? But you've got to build and cultivate these relationships over months and years if you really want a sustainable business with integrity over time, right? I've watched people scale 0 to 10K, 30, 50K months. I've seen people, I work with people that have million plus months, right? But every one of them came with time and generativity. They didn't skip a season. They had slow quarters, right? But then they didn't understand that slow quarter allowed them to take a step back, rework some marketing, and then boosted new growth on top of that, right? Look, we call it a practice, the work that I do, for a reason. You'll be a better coach, a better leader in 7 years than you are today, right? It's not an insult. That's the season. I thought I was the best leader in the world at 26. Right? I had so much work to do and so much learning to do. And those seasons are natural and normal. It doesn't mean you can't create something now. It just means that you can see yourself continuing to create something bigger. That tree you planted is growing. Okay, finally, want to think about the ecosystem, right? It's all interconnected, baby. You are not alone. You are not a factory separated from everything outside, right? Nothing in nature grows alone. Their trees need pollinators. They need root networks, mycelial networks. They need companion plants. They need fungi breaking down the soil. They need little critters moving their seeds back and forth, right? In business, a team isn't an org chart. It's an organism. A business grows inside a community or it doesn't grow at all, right? Dave has a whole pipeline that he can build. It's his ecosystem, right? The groups that he's in, the contacts he has, he can cultivate, he can build those, and it can feed him and it can feed his clients. He can't just randomly pop it out there, right? I work with so many awesome leaders, and what they really learn, right? What most of them know, but some of them don't, and they learn it is nobody can farm alone. Right? I have my own coach. Just because the business is successful doesn't mean that I stop growing. So, who's in your ecosystem? And side note, if you want to come to the campfire, join my ecosystem. That's one of my every Tuesday, 1 p.m. for free. A bunch of leaders get together. We work through challenges together. It's been so meaningful for me, and that's one of my ecosystems, right? So I want to talk about the 3 gardens of my life. Okay? So 3 phases of my life that you can see this working, right? So phase 1, when I was working in the machine. I just graduated my graduate school. I was in New York, and I slotted myself into a cubicle doing work that didn't fit me. I was a substance abuse counselor for prisoners who were getting out after 15, 20 years, right? Didn't fit me. But I was trying, right? I found my little cubby hole so I could make my money out of grad school, right? The machine processed people like parts. Me, them, like the clients, right? There were standardized programs, mandated schedules. Everybody had to come through the same chute. So I remember one client in particular. I hope he's doing well. He was this guy. He'd just gotten out of prison for 15 years. He was trying to hold down a job as a moving guy. Right? But the program said he had to come to these 3 groups a week at these very specific times. There was no flexibility. He had to come see me at specific times, right? I didn't want to force that structure on him. The program did. And guess what happened, right? If he's a moving guy, he has to go when they're ready, right? He lost the job. So, he was in an impossible situation. He either loses the job or he gets reincarcerated, right? But if he loses his job, what does he do for money, right? So, the machine was so busy running its process, it uprooted the life it was supposed to be helping, it was supposed to be growing. And I've seen this for so many businesses, especially in Michigan. There are a number of older, kind of old style industrial businesses, maybe some big auto manufacturers, I don't know, that are very much, they have these systems and these processes in place, and all of the people get bulldozed on the way through, right? So this is what happens when a system serves its own structure instead of the living things that are inside it. Okay. Phase 2, I want to talk about my journey building somebody else's machine, but also growing organically inside it, right? So this is kind of the middle ground. Most of you know I spent about 8 years helping to build my own practice, right? This was essentially, when I say somebody else's machine, they had the specific way they wanted these things to work, right? That weren't necessarily organic to me, right? But I'm young, so I'm going to listen, right? So, I helped grow the team from 2 to 16 clinicians. We rebuilt systems, we wrote curriculum, but the whole time I was growing my practice inside this practice, and I was doing it a pretty organic way, right? I started with $50 cash. I did not take insurance. I was networking. I was going to networking breakfasts, giving community talks. I was giving value away, helping people all I could, right? And so ultimately for me, what felt good was, it was not the machine. And again, I don't want to get into this giant discussion about, all practices and insurance panels, and everybody works differently. But for me, right, the machine was the insurance panels, a standardized process. And that didn't fit me. What fit me was relationships and generosity. And the good news is it filled my caseload for 8 straight years. And then once I went on my own, kept filling my caseload. If I'm honest, I've been running on I don't want to call it the fumes, but the flywheel that I built up for years. People just call me, right? 0 paid marketing. I have not paid for marketing. The part that made me who I am is that I try, whenever I'm in something, I'm working with a business owner, a leader, I try to rebuild the system in those companies, right? And when I used to do it ineffectively, it was because I was trying to push myself onto the businesses that I was working in, right? That doesn't work. But what I do now is I teach the leaders to understand what's organically true for them. And some of them have tried to grab these things from outside and pasted them on, and they don't really fit, or they're building somebody else's machine, or they're building somebody else's business and they don't even realize it. The ceiling is never in the systems. It's in our connection to those systems. Are those systems organic, right? So the ceiling was never the system. Your business is an extension of your nervous system. No org chart survives contact with an unhealed nervous system, which is why I work with leaders to help them heal from the inside out, right? So now, phase 3, I'm tending my own garden, right? It's all me now. I can't rush it. I can't force clients to call, right? I'm in my own seasons like everybody else. But the trees that I planted 10 years ago keep bearing fruit. Relationships from decades back till send people to me. Clients stay 5 years, 10 years, and depending on the client, anywhere, I have clients that stay 6 months, and I have clients I've been with for 10 years, right? My job now is to keep doing what a good gardener does, keep tilling the soil, enriching the soil, planting things, watering, right? And knowing some of those things I won't harvest for years. This podcast is not going to be an immediate, I'm aware of what's happening, guys. I know I'm getting a couple of views. I'm thrilled about it, right? But this is going to be something that builds over time. You can't build a factory in a weekend, but you can carry seeds. And I've planted this garden, and it's grown. And I've done this twice, essentially. And, I want to teach other people how to build their own garden, right? The machine thinking says, fix the org chart, add a process. Organic thinking says, make sure the gardener and the gardener are healthy and heal before you grow. That's why it's the gardener himself is the first factor, not a footnote, right? So, look, the leaders this world needs will not be manufactured. Okay, parts get manufactured. Leaders get cultivated. And a leader who grows this way stops treating their people as parts, and that's how the team becomes the organization. The culture shifts, and that business keeps building up, right? So when I talk about building liberated leaders, when I talk about building in flow, as we heal, the team heals, the organization heals, and then it grows in these beautiful ways. So here's the question. Where are you standing over something alive? Your business, your team, your family, yourself, trying to read a machine gauge. And what happens if you ask a gardener's question instead? What does this seed need to grow? So tangibly, what are you ashamed of right now that's actually just not in season yet, that needs a little more water, that needs a little more patience? So look, this growth doesn't happen alone. That's why we're building this community. Like I said, come join the campfire every Tuesday, 1 p.m., absolutely free. Link is in the show notes anywhere you're finding this, 1 p.m. Eastern. It's free. Did I say that? It's a free community, right? And it's just for leaders, and we've just been having fun, and you can check out some of the streams on YouTube, right? All right. So I think you guys get this. I want to help people understand how to grow things in an organic way instead of a manufactured way. Okay? So, if this episode resonated with you, that's exactly why we've built this. The work you're doing matters, and it's not meant to be done alone. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening, and share this episode with a leader maybe who's struggling with some of the shame because his factory isn't growing as quick as it's supposed to grow, so that they can be opened into this idea of organic growth. Share this episode with a leader who's ready for something deeper. And you could also follow along on Instagram between episodes for more tools, reflections, real conversations. Let us know what you want to explore next. Come and apply to be on the podcast. We'd love to have you. But this is bigger than a podcast. This is a movement. It's a community of authentic leaders that are choosing to grow, heal, and step into who they were meant to be so they can make the impact the world actually needs. So thank you for being here. As always, let's keep evolving on purpose together.